Welcome to Forbidden Love Story Channel, where secrets unravel and hearts collide. My name is Laila, and at 34 I stand on the fragile edge of a life I once thought unbreakable. For 8 years, I've been bound to Juris, my husband, in a marriage that gleams like polished amber under the pale Latvian sun. Our home, a crooked wooden cottage on the outskirts of Riga, huddles against the whispering pines, where the Baltic winds weave secrets through the branches and the earth hums with quiet resilience. To the world, we are a portrait of contentment, evenings spent tracing forest paths, our laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves, our shared dreams flickering like candlelight against the long northern nights. But beneath this tender facade, something festers, something dark and unspoken, clawing at the seams of our union. No one sees it. No one guesses that the moment Edgars, Juris's father, crossed our threshold, his sorrow-soaked presence shattered the stillness and set ablaze a restless ember I didn't know slept within me. Our life wasn't always this brittle. Once it glowed with a soft, steady warmth, a haven carved from the rugged beauty of Latvia's hills. I'd linger in our kitchen each morning, the scent of black tea curling through the air, watching dawn spill silver across the frost-kissed fields. The house, with its sagging beams and ivy-twisted walls, felt like an extension of my soul, a place where time slowed, where I could breathe. Juris and I had stitched this world together, thread by fragile thread, and for years it held me like a lover's embrace. But then Edgars arrived, a tempest wrapped in mourning, and the air shifted, charged, heavy, alive with something I couldn't name. He came 3 months ago, after death stole his wife, Juris's mother, leaving him adrift. His boots thudded against our porch, his eyes sunken with grief, his voice a low rumble that stirred the silence. At 62, he bore the weight of decades, silver hair glinting like frost, hands rough as the bark of the trees outside. And yet, there was a quiet fire in him, a spark that caught me off guard. I didn't want him here, not at first. His arrival felt like an intrusion, a ripple across the glassy surface of our routine. Juris welcomed him with a son's reluctant duty, his jaw tight with the strain of their fractured bond, and I nodded along, swallowing the unease that fluttered in my chest. I told myself I'd adapt, that I'd weave him into our days like a stray thread in a tapestry, but Edgars didn't fit. He loomed. His silence roared louder than words, his gaze a steady pulse that found me in the quiet moments. I'd catch him watching me as I moved through the house, his eyes tracing me with an intensity that prickled my skin. Not accusing, not cruel, but alive, awake, pulling at something buried deep within. It terrified me, thrilled me, shamed me all at once. 8 years with Juris had dulled my edges, softened me into a shape I thought I'd chosen, but Edgars, he woke something wild, something I'd forgotten I could feel. The cracks were already there, though I'd refused to see them. Juris had drifted, his nights swallowed by the university, his warmth replaced by a distracted hum. I'd wait for him, the hearth's glow mocking my solitude, my heart aching behind every forced smile. He'd return, eyes shadowed with fatigue, and I'd pretend it didn't hurt, pretend the distance wasn't growing, wasn't real. But it was, and Edgar's presence made it impossible to ignore. He didn't try to unravel us. He didn't have to. He simply existed, solid, broken, magnetic, and I felt myself tilting toward him, a moth to a flame I couldn't extinguish. Each morning, as I stood by the stove, the clatter of pots a flimsy shield, I'd feel his eyes on me, warm and unyielding, and my breath would catch, my resolve tremble. What was this? Guilt? Longing? I didn't know, couldn't name it, but it was there, relentless, undeniable. Tearing at the fragile piece I'd clung to for so long, Edgars didn't force his way into my heart. He slipped in, quiet as the mist that blankets Riga's fields at dawn. It started so subtly, so innocently, that I barely noticed the shift until it was too late. Our house, once a cocoon of predictability, buzzed with a new energy since he arrived. Juris moved through our days like a ghost, his presence fleeting, his mind tethered to the university's endless demands. I'd watch him leave each morning, his coat flapping in the wind, and feel the hollow ache of his absence settle deeper. But Edgars stayed. He lingered, his shadow stretching across the wooden floors, his voice a low hum that stirred the stillness. And with every glance, every word, he unravelled something inside me, something raw, restless, alive. The kitchen became our unspoken battleground. I'd stand by the counter, the clatter of dishes of fragile armour, while the scent of dill and rye bread filled the air. Edgars would sit at the table, his broad hands cradling a chipped mug, his eyes following me with a steadiness that made my skin prickle. It wasn't bold, not demanding, just there, patient and piercing, like the slow drip of water wearing down stone. "Laila, you've a gift for this," he'd say, his gravelly tone warm with admiration as I slid a plate of currams toward him. I'd flush, my cheeks burning despite my efforts to stay composed, muttering a quick "thank you" before turning away. But his gaze clung to me, soft yet searing, and I'd feel it long after. A shiver racing down my spine, a whisper of something I couldn't name. I hated how it thrilled me. Juris was my husband, my tether, the man I'd promised my life to. Yet his distracted nods and hurried kisses left me starving for something more. Something Edgars seemed to offer without even trying. He didn't flirt, didn't chase. He simply existed, his presence a quiet storm that tugged at my edges. I'd catch myself lingering near him, drawn by the way he'd tilt his head when he spoke, or the faint curve of his lips when he smiled, a smile that carried the weight of loss yet flickered with life. It was wrong, I knew it, but the knowing didn't stop the pull. It grew, insidious and fierce, rooting itself in the silences we shared. One evening, the tension snapped taut. Juris had vanished into the city again, leaving me alone with Edgars in the dim glow of our living room. The hearth crackled, casting shadows that danced across the walls, and outside, the wind howled through the pines, rattling the windows. I'd perched on the sofa, pretending to knit, the emerald wool tangling in my trembling hands. Edgars sat across from me, a book open on his lap, but his eyes weren't on the pages, they were on me. I felt it before I saw it, a heat that crept up my neck, quickening my pulse. "You're restless tonight," he said, his voice low, almost tender, cutting through the quiet like a blade. I froze, the needles clattering against each other. "Am I?" I replied, forcing a laugh that sounded brittle, hollow. He nodded, closing the book with a soft thud, his gaze locking onto mine. "You've been restless since I got here," he added, not accusing, just observing, his words heavy with unspoken truth. My breath hitched, caught in the tangle of my guilt and longing. I wanted to deny it, to fling the words back at him, but they stuck in my throat, sharp and unyielding. Instead, I looked away, staring into the fire as if it could burn away the chaos swelling inside me. He stood then, slow and deliberate, crossing the room to sit beside me. The sofa creaked under his weight, and I felt the warmth of him, solid, steady, dangerously close. "Laila," he said softly, his voice a rumble that vibrated through me. "You don't have to hide it. I see it too." My heart slammed against my ribs, a wild, frantic thing, and I turned to him, my eyes wide with panic and something darker, desire, maybe, or despair. "See what?" I whispered, the words trembling, barely audible over the fire's hiss. He didn't answer, not with words. His hand lifted, hovering near my cheek, then dropped as if burned by the thought. But his eyes, those haunted, living eyes, spoke volumes, stripping me bare. "You feel it," he murmured, his tone thick with something raw, something shared. "I do too." The admission hung between us, heavy and electric, a thread pulled too tight. I should have stood, should have fled, but I didn't. I stayed, pinned by the weight of his confession, my chest aching with a hunger I couldn't suppress. The days blurred after that, each one a tightrope walk between restraint and surrender. We'd brush past each other in the narrow hall, the air crackling with unspoken tension. I'd catch his scent, pine and smoke, earthy and warm, and my resolve would falter, my thoughts spiraling into forbidden corners. At night, I'd lie beside Juris, his snores a dull rhythm, while my mind replayed Edgars' voice, his touchless nearness, the way he made me feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. Guilt gnawed at me, relentless and bitter, but it couldn't douse the fire he'd lit. It burned brighter, fiercer, consuming the woman I'd been and leaving someone new in her wake. One afternoon, as snow dusted the fields outside, we found ourselves alone again. Juris had called, his voice clipped through the phone, promising another late night. I'd hung up, frustration simmering in my veins, and turned to find Edgars watching me from the doorway. "You deserve more than that," he said, his words quiet but sharp, slicing through my defenses. I bristled, anger flaring to mask the truth. "Don't!" I snapped, but he stepped closer. Undeterred, his presence a wall I couldn't push past. "You're fading here, Laila," he pressed, his eyes blazing with a mix of sorrow and resolve. "I see it. You're more than this." My breath caught, tears pricking my eyes as his words struck deep. I wanted to scream, to shove him away, but instead I stood there, trembling, caught in the gravity of him. He reached out then, his fingers grazing my arm, a touch so light it seared. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. The room shrank, the world narrowing to the space between us, and I felt myself tipping, falling into something vast and terrifying. Edgars didn't move closer, didn't press, but his eyes held mine, steady and unyielding, promising something I wasn't sure I could survive. That was when I knew. This wasn't fleeting, wasn't a mistake to brush aside. It was real, alive, a current pulling me under. And as the snow fell silent outside, blanketing Latvia's frozen earth, I realized I was already too far gone to turn back. The fire Edgars had lit within me didn't flicker. It raged, a relentless blaze that devoured my every quiet moment. Our house near Riga, once a sanctuary of pine-scented stillness, now felt like a cage, its wooden walls pressing in with every breath. Juris moved through our days like a phantom, his presence a faint echo drowned by the university's siren call. I'd watch him leave each morning, his coat flapping against the Baltic wind, and feel the ache of his absence twist deeper, a knife I couldn't pull free. But Edgars, he stayed, his shadow stretching across the floors, his voice a gravelly tether that anchored me even as it unravelled me. What had begun as fleeting glances and stolen silences had swollen into something monstrous, something I couldn't contain, and I was drowning in it, torn between the husband I'd vowed to love and the man who'd woken a part of me I'd buried long ago. Guilt clawed at me, sharp and unyielding, a beast gnashing its teeth in the pit of my stomach. Juris was my foundation, the man who'd held my hand through Latvia's bitter winters, whose steady laugh once filled our home with light. Yet that light had dimmed, replaced by distracted grunts and late-night returns, his warmth slipping through my fingers like sand. I'd lie beside him at night, his snores a dull rhythm against the darkness, and feel the void yawn wider, a hunger he no longer fed. Edgars didn't have to try. His mere existence pierced that void, his eyes tracing me with a quiet fire that made me feel seen, alive, wanted. It was wrong, a betrayal etched in every stolen glance, but the shame couldn't snuff out the longing, it only sharpened it, a blade pressed against my heart. The tension simmered in every corner of the house, a storm brewing beneath the surface. I'd catch myself lingering near Edgars, drawn by the way his hands moved, rough and deliberate, as he fixed a creaking chair or stirred his coffee. His scent, pine and smoke, earthy and warm, would drift toward me. and my resolve would buckle, my thoughts spiraling into forbidden territory. I'd chastise myself, muttering silent prayers for strength, but the pull was relentless, a tide dragging me under. He felt it too. I saw it in the way his gaze lingered, soft yet searing, a question neither of us dared voice. We danced around it, a fragile waltz of restraint and surrender, each step pushing us closer to a precipice I couldn't climb back from. One evening, the storm broke free. Juris had vanished into Riga again, his car's rumble fading into the snowy dusk, leaving me alone with Edgars in the living room's flickering glow. The hearth spat embers, casting restless shadows across the walls, while outside, the wind howled through the pines, a mournful cry that mirrored my turmoil. I perched on the sofa, a skein of emerald wool unravelling in my lap, my knitting needles trembling in my grip. Edgars sat across from me, a book open but unread, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that burned through the dimness. "You're fighting something," he said, his voice low, cutting through the silence like a shard of glass. I flinched, the needles clattering against each other, a brittle sound that betrayed my nerves. "What do you mean?" I replied, my tone sharp, a flimsy shield against the truth. He closed the book with a soft thud, rising to cross the room, his footsteps a quiet thunder on the wooden floor. The sofa groaned as he sat beside me, his warmth flooding the space, solid, steady, perilously close. "You're fighting this," he murmured, his voice a rumble that vibrated through me. "What's growing between us? I feel it too." My heart slammed against my ribs, a frantic, caged beast, and I turned to him, eyes wide with panic and a darker, deeper ache. "There's nothing to fight," I lied, the words quivering, crumbling under his gaze. He didn't flinch. His hand lifted, hovering near my cheek, then fell as if burned by the boundary we'd drawn. But his eyes, those haunted, blazing wells, stripped me bare, peeling back the lies I'd wrapped around myself. "You're lying," he said, his tone thick with sorrow and resolve. "To me? To yourself?" "I see it, Laila, you're tearing yourself apart." The words struck deep, a hammer against glass, shattering my defences. I wanted to scream, to shove him away, but I stayed, rooted, trembling, caught in the gravity of his truth. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and traitorous, as the war inside me roared louder. Loyalty to Juris clashing with the wildfire Edgars had ignited. The days blurred into a haze of torment. I'd move through the house like a ghost, my hands busy with chores, scrubbing pots, folding linens, while my mind churned with chaos. Edgar's presence was everywhere, a pulse I couldn't escape. We'd brush past each other in the narrow hall, the air crackling with unspoken tension, and I'd feel his warmth linger on my skin, a brand I couldn't erase. At night, I'd lie awake, Juris's snores a dull counterpoint to the storm in my chest, my thoughts spiralling to Edgar's. His voice, his touchless nearness, the way he made me feel alive when Juris left me hollow. I'd whisper to myself that it was madness, that I could stop it. But the lie tasted bitter, hollowed out by the truth I couldn't face. One afternoon, as snow blanketed the fields in a silent shroud, the tension snapped again. Juris had called, his voice clipped through the phone, promising another late night in Riga. I'd hung up, frustration boiling in my veins, and turned to find Edgars leaning in the doorway, his frame filling the space like a wall. "He doesn't see you," he said, his words quiet but sharp, slicing through my anger. I bristled, defiance flaring to mask the wound his truth reopened. "Don't!" I snapped, my voice cracking, but he stepped closer, his presence unyielding, a force I couldn't push back. "You're fading here, Laila," he pressed, his eyes blazing with a mix of grief and steel. "I see it. You're more than this shadow he leaves behind." My breath caught, tears stinging as his words pierced deep, striking a chord I'd silenced too long. I wanted to lash out, to bury the pain beneath a scream, but I stood there, trembling, ensnared by the weight of him. He reached out, his fingers grazing my arm, a touch so light it seared, igniting a spark that raced through me. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. The room shrank, the world collapsing into the space between us, and I felt myself tipping, plunging into a chasm I couldn't escape. "Edgars," I whispered, my voice breaking. "This is wrong. We can't—" But the words faltered, drowned by the hunger in his eyes, the mirror of my own. He nodded, his hand falling, but his gaze held mine, steady and unyielding. "I know," he murmured, his tone thick with anguish, "but I can't stop it. Can you?" The question hung there, a live wire sparking between us, heavy with danger and inevitability. I should have fled, should have clung to the vows I'd made to Juris, but I didn't. I stayed, pinned by the truth we'd both tasted, my chest tight with a longing I couldn't bury. The external world pressed in too, oblivious yet suffocating. Juris returned that night, his boots thudding on the porch, his voice cheerful as he called out, "Laila, I'm home." I froze, my heart lurching as Edgars stepped back, the space between us snapping cold and empty. I forced a smile, greeting Juris with a kiss that felt like ash on my lips, while Edgars lingered in the shadows, his silence a roar in my ears. Juris didn't notice, didn't see the storm brewing beneath my skin, the war tearing me apart. He chattered about his day, oblivious to the tension coiling around us, and I nodded, my voice a hollow echo, my eyes darting to Edgar's retreating form. That night, as Juris slept beside me, I stared into the darkness, the wind's wail outside a mirror to my chaos. I was trapped, split between the man I'd promised my life to and the one who'd claimed my soul. Guilt and desire wrestled within me, a brutal dance with no end, and I knew I couldn't outrun it. Edgars had become my shadow, my sin, my salvation, and with every heartbeat, I felt the abyss yawn wider, pulling me toward a reckoning I couldn't avoid. The line I'd crossed with Edgars wasn't a line at all. It was a chasm, vast and jagged, and I'd leapt into it with reckless abandon. Our house near Riga, once a haven of pine-scented peace, had morphed into a battlefield, its wooden walls trembling with the weight of my secrets. Juris drifted through our days like a wisp of smoke, his presence faint, his mind tethered to the university's relentless pull. I'd watch him leave each morning, his coat flapping against the Baltic wind, and feel the sting of his absence sharpen, a wound I couldn't heal. But Edgars, he stayed, his shadow a constant pulse, his voice a gravelly anchor that held me even as it dragged me under. What had begun as whispers and glances had erupted into something undeniable, a fire that consumed me, and I was powerless against its roar. The tension had thickened, a storm cloud swelling over our fragile world. I'd catch myself swaying toward Edgars, drawn by the quiet strength in his hands, the way his eyes, deep and blazing, followed me with a hunger that mirrored my own. We'd dance around it, a brittle waltz of restraint and yearning, but the threads holding me to Juris frayed with every step. Guilt gnawed at me, a relentless beast tearing at my insides, but it couldn't douse the longing. It only fueled it, a wildfire I couldn't contain. I'd lie beside Juris at night, his snores a dull rhythm against the darkness, and feel Edgar's presence linger like a phantom, his touchless nearness searing my skin. I was unraveling, split between the man I'd vowed to love and the one who'd claimed my soul, and the weight of it crushed me. The breaking point came swift and brutal, a thunderclap shattering the silence. Juris had planned a rare evening with friends in Riga, a flicker of normalcy I clung to like a lifeline. "I'll be late, Laila," he'd said at dinner, his voice light, his smile oblivious to the chaos swirling beneath my skin. "Don't wait up, just relax." I nodded, forcing a grin that felt like glass in my throat, while Edgars sat across the table, his gaze a quiet storm I couldn't escape. The moment Juris's car rumbled down the snowy lane, the air in the house shifted, charged, heavy, alive with possibility. I exchanged a glance with Edgars, a silent pact sparking between us, and I knew this was our chance to face the truth we'd buried too long. We drifted to the veranda, the night air crisp and biting, the stars glinting like shards of ice above Latvia's frozen fields. The wooden boards creaked beneath our feet, the wind whistling through the pines a mournful backdrop to the tension coiling inside me. I sat on the bench, my hands trembling, the cold seeping through my coat as Edgars settled beside me, his warmth a dangerous lure. "Laila," he began, his voice low, threading through the quiet like a taut string. "We can't keep hiding. It's real." My heart slammed against my ribs, a frantic caged thing, and I turned to him, eyes wide with fear and a deeper, darker truth. "Edgars," I whispered, my voice quivering. "I know. I love you. I can't stop it. But Juris..." He took my hand, his grip firm yet trembling, his eyes blazing with a mix of resolve and anguish. "I love you too," he said, his words a hammer striking my chest. "And it's tearing me apart to see you suffer. We have to be honest, with ourselves, with him." Tears pricked my eyes, hot and traitorous, as his confession sank deep, a blade twisting in my gut. I wanted to pull away, to cling to the vows I'd made, but his touch anchored me, his sincerity a mirror to my own chaos. "How?" I choked out, my voice breaking. "How do we do this to him?" He leaned closer, his breath warm against my skin, his gaze unyielding. "We tell him," he murmured, together. "It'll hurt, but it's the only way." The words hung there, heavy with inevitability, and I felt the ground shift beneath me, the chasm yawning wider. I nodded, tears spilling down my cheeks, and he tilted his head, his lips brushing mine, a kiss soft yet searing, a spark that ignited the storm within me. For a moment, everything clarified, the world narrowing to the heat of him, the rightness of us, and I surrendered to it, lost in the fire. Then the world shattered. A car's engine growled in the distance, headlights slicing through the darkness, and my heart plummeted. A stone sinking into icy depths. We pulled apart, panic flaring in Edgar's eyes, mirroring my own. "Juris," I gasped, my voice a ragged whisper, praying I was wrong. But it was him. His meeting cancelled, his return unannounced, his silhouette emerging from the snowy path like a spectre of judgment. He stepped onto the veranda, his fishing gear slung over his shoulder, his smile fading as he caught us, dishevelled, breathless, guilt etched across our faces. "What's going on here?" His voice was sharp, laced with confusion, the wind swallowing its edges. I froze, my lips dry. My mind a frantic blur, while Edgars straightened, stepping forward with a resolve I couldn't muster. "Juris," he said, his tone trembling but firm. "We need to talk." Juris's eyes darted between us, narrowing, his face paling as realization crept in. "About what?" he snapped, dropping his gear with a thud that echoed in my chest. His voice rising. "About how you're kissing my wife out here? I'm not blind. What is this?" Tears welled in my eyes, a flood I couldn't hold back, and I stumbled toward him, my hands outstretched. "Juris, I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice splintering. Edgars and I, we have feelings for each other." The words tasted like ash, bitter and final, and Juris recoiled, his eyes widening as if struck by lightning. "Feelings?" he growled, his voice trembling with rage and disbelief. "Are you joking? Is this some twisted game?" His gaze swung to Edgars, burning with betrayal. "You, my own father." Edgars stepped forward, his hands raised, his voice thick with regret. "Juris, listen, I know how this looks, but..." Juris cut him off, his shout exploding into the night. "You don't know anything. How could you do this? To me, to us?" I reached for him, desperate to bridge the gulf, but he jerked back, his face contorted with disgust. "Don't touch me, Laila," he spat, his words a lash across my soul. "You both sicken me. I don't want to see either of you again." He turned, storming toward his car, and I lunged after him, my voice raw with desperation. "Juris, please, wait, let us explain." But he didn't stop, didn't look back. He yanked the door open, pausing only to shout, "I'll file for divorce. I hope I never lay eyes on you again." The engine roared, tires crunching snow as he sped into the darkness, leaving a silence so vast it swallowed me whole. I stood there, trembling, the wind biting my tear-streaked face, while Edgars remained behind me, his breath ragged, his presence a weight I couldn't bear. I turned to him, my voice a broken whisper. "What have we done?" The question hung there, a wound bleeding into the night, and Edgars' eyes, once blazing, dimmed with devastation, his shoulders slumping under the burden of our choice. "I don't know, Laila," he said, his voice hollow, "but we have to live with it now." The words sank deep, a stone in my chest, and I felt the world I'd known crumble, its ashes scattering across Latvia's frozen earth. Juris was gone, his trust shattered, our life in ruins, and all that remained was the wreckage of what we'd dared to chase. The veranda stood silent, the stars above cold and indifferent, and I knew this was only the beginning of the fallout. Edgars and I had ignited a fire we couldn't control, and now it burned through everything. Our home, our family, our souls, leaving nothing but smoke and regret in its wake. The storm that shattered my life left a silence so vast it swallowed everything. Juris's car had vanished into the snowy night, his final words, sharp as a blade, echoing in the frigid air of our Riga outskirts home. The veranda, where Edgars and I had bared our souls, stood cold and empty, the wind whistling through the pines a mournful dirge for what we'd destroyed. I turned to Edgars, my breath ragged, my eyes stinging with tears that wouldn't stop, and saw the devastation mirrored in his face. His once blazing gaze dulled by regret, his shoulders slumped under the weight of our choice. "What now?" I whispered, my voice a fragile thread snapping in the quiet, and he shook his head, his silence a heavier answer than words could carry. We returned to the house the next morning, the dawn pale and unforgiving, casting long shadows across the wooden floors. The walls, once warm with memories of Juris's laughter, now loomed like sentinels of judgment, their silence accusing. Edgars suggested I stay with him, his voice tentative, his eyes searching mine for something, hope, perhaps, or absolution. "Until we figure this out," he said, and I nodded, though doubt gnawed at me, a relentless ache in my chest. I packed a small bag, my hands trembling as I folded clothes that still smelled of Juris, and followed Edgars to his old cottage on the city's edge, a weathered haven of stone and timber nestled among Latvia's rolling hills. It was cosy, its hearth crackling with a promise of warmth, but the walls pressed in, whispering reminders of what we'd done. The first days crawled by, each one a fragile attempt to stitch together a new beginning. We moved through the motions, cooking dinners of rye bread and smoked fish, walking the snow-dusted trails, our boots crunching in unison. But the air between us was thick with unspoken grief. I'd catch Edgars staring into the fire, his hands clenched, his jaw tight, and know his thoughts mirrored mine, replaying that night, the veranda, Juris's anguished face. We tried to talk, to plan a future, but every word felt hollow, a brittle shell cracking under the weight of our guilt. "We can make this work," he'd say, his voice firm yet fraying, and I'd nod, forcing a smile that tasted like ash, though inside I felt the emptiness yawn wider. The cottage became a crucible, testing a love we'd fought for but couldn't sustain. I'd stand at the kitchen window, watching the snow fall in silent sheets, and feel the loneliness seep deeper, a cold tide drowning my resolve. Edgars tried. He'd hold my hand, his touch warm and steady, or murmur reassurances that echoed with sincerity, but it wasn't enough. The fire that had drawn us together flickered, choked by the debris of what we'd shattered. I missed Juris, not just the man he'd been, but the life we'd built, the simplicity I'd traded for this chaotic ache. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust rattling the windows, reminded me of him, of us, and the betrayal I couldn't unmake. One evening, as dusk painted the hills in shades of indigo, the truth broke free. We sat on Edgars's veranda, the air crisp and biting, the stars glinting like shards of ice above. I cradled a mug of tea, its warmth seeping into my palms, while Edgars gazed into the distance, his silence a heavy cloak. "Do you think about him?" I asked, my voice soft, trembling with a fear I couldn't bury. He turned to me, his eyes shadowed, and nodded slowly. "Every day," he admitted, his tone thick with pain. "I think about how I failed him, my son, how I failed you too." The words struck deep, a hammer against my fragile heart, and I felt tears well, hot and relentless. "We thought we could start over," he continued, his voice faltering. "But it's not working, is it? This guilt, it's eating us alive." I shook my head, the tears spilling now, tracing icy paths down my cheeks. "No," I whispered, "it's not. I love you, Edgars, but every time I look at you, I see what we did, how we broke him." He exhaled, a shuddering breath that mirrored my own, and leaned forward, his hands clasped tight. "I feel it too," he said, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I thought this was right, but maybe we destroyed too much to build anything new." The realization settled between us, a stone sinking into still water, rippling through the silence. "Maybe we need to let go," he murmured, his voice breaking. "Not because I don't love you, but because I have to fix what I can, with him." My chest tightened, a sob clawing its way up my throat, but I knew he was right. We couldn't forge a future on this fractured ground, couldn't outrun the ghosts of our past. "You're right," I said, my voice a ragged whisper. "It's better this way, for both of us." He stood then, crossing to me and pulled me into his arms, his embrace firm yet tender, a goodbye woven into its strength. "I'll never forget you, Laila," he said, his breath warm against my hair. "You changed me, gave me something I didn't know I could feel." I clung to him, tears soaking his coat, and felt a weight lift, even as an emptiness bloomed in its place. "I'll always be grateful," I choked out, "but we can't keep this." He nodded, pulling back, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. And I saw the resolve settle in him, a man determined to mend what he'd broken. I packed my things that night, the cottage's quiet pressing against me like a bruise. Edgars stood at the door as I left, his silhouette framed by the hearth's glow, and I knew this was the end. The last time we'd stand so close, bound by a love we couldn't keep. He'd try to rebuild with Juris, to salvage the bond we'd severed, and I'd return to our house to face the wreckage alone. The drive back was a blur, the snow falling in silent sheets, Latvia's hills stretching dark and endless around me. I stepped into the house, cold, hollow, stripped of Juris's presence, and felt the full force of what we'd lost crash over me. Edgars and I had chased a fleeting dream, a spark that burned too bright, and now all that remained was ash. Scattered, irretrievable, a testament to our ruin. We tried to hold on, to defy the cost, but the price was too steep, the wounds too deep. As I sank to the floor, the silence roaring in my ears, I knew this was only the beginning of a harder road, one I'd walk alone, haunted by the choices we'd made and the love we'd let slip away. The house welcomed me back with a silence so thick it smothered me. After leaving Edgars, I returned to our Riga outskirts home, its wooden walls standing like mute witnesses to my unravelling. The pines outside whispered in the wind, their mournful hum a cruel echo of the life I'd lost. Juris was gone, his absence a gaping wound carved into every corner. His coat no longer hung by the door, his laughter no longer warmed the air. Edgars, too, had faded into the distance, his cottage a memory I couldn't revisit. I was alone, truly alone, and the weight of it pressed down. a stone crushing my chest as I stepped into the cold, hollow shell of what had once been ours. At first I tried to fill the void, to stitch together some semblance of normalcy. I'd wander the rooms, my footsteps echoing on the wooden floors, and busy my hands, scrubbing counters, tending the hearth, writing for my blog about Latvia's quiet beauty. The words flowed, sharp and brittle, a fragile shield against the chaos churning inside me. I'd stand at the kitchen window, watching the snow pile high against the fields, and tell myself time would mend the fractures, time would dull the ache of Juris's betrayal, the sting of Edgars's goodbye. But the lie tasted sour, crumbling with every sunrise, and the loneliness crept closer, a shadow I couldn't outrun. Nights were the hardest, a relentless descent into despair. I'd sit at the table where Juris and I once shared meals, the silence roaring louder than our lost conversations. The food I cooked, rye bread, smoked fish, sat untouched, its scent mocking my hollow hunger. Sleep eluded me, the bed vast and frigid without Juris's steady warmth, my mind spiralling through memories I couldn't bury. I'd see his face, his eyes blazing with hurt that night on the veranda, and feel the guilt twist deeper, a knife I'd plunged myself. Edgars haunted me too, his quiet strength a ghost in the darkness, and I'd wonder if he'd found peace with Juris, if they'd salvaged what I'd shattered. The thought brought a flicker of relief, then a flood of pain, a reminder of the family I'd lost. One evening, the weight grew unbearable. I sank to the floor, the cold seeping through my clothes, and stared into the void, my breath shallow, my tears relentless. I clutched the phone, Juris's number glowing on the screen, my thumb hovering over the call button. What could I say? "I'm sorry," felt flimsy, a whisper against the storm I'd unleashed. I dropped it, the clatter echoing in the stillness, and let the sobs come, raw, guttural, a release I couldn't stifle. I couldn't forgive myself, couldn't unsee the wreckage I'd wrought, and the isolation tightened its grip, a noose around my soul. Days bled into weeks, and I withdrew further, a hermit in my own ruins. I stopped leaving the house, the world beyond the windows grey and meaningless. Friends called, their voices distant through the phone, but I let them fade, fearing their questions, their pitying stares. I'd wander the streets in my mind, retracing paths Juris and I once walked, the cobblestones of Riga now a faded dream. One afternoon, I ventured to a cafe we'd loved, its warmth a stark contrast to my chill. I sat by the window, coffee cooling in my hands, watching strangers laugh and live while I drifted, a spectre among them. The waitress smiled, but I couldn't muster a response, my face a mask hiding the melancholy devouring me. A message from Edgars broke the silence one day, brief and heavy. He'd met Juris, talked, begun mending their bond. "Step by step," he wrote, and I replied with hollow congratulations, a faint spark of joy drowned by loss. He was moving on, building anew, and I was glad, truly, but it cemented my exile. They were my family once, and now I was a stranger, cast out by my own hand. The house grew colder, the emptiness sharper, and I sank deeper, a prisoner of my regrets. In that silence, I understood. I'd destroyed everything, Juris's trust, Edgars's hope, my own peace, and the road ahead loomed long and solitary. I couldn't see the end, couldn't imagine joy, but I knew I had to walk it, to face the echoes of my choices alone, searching for a way to forgive the woman I'd become. The silence of my Riga outskirts home became a mirror, reflecting a woman I barely recognized. Weeks had bled into months since Edgar's message, since Juris's absence carved a permanent hollow in my world. The house stood frozen, its wooden walls heavy with echoes of a life I'd torched. Juris's laughter, Edgars's quiet strength, the warmth I'd traded for ashes. Snow piled high outside, blanketing Latvia's fields in a shroud of white, while inside I drifted through the wreckage, a ghost tethered to my regrets. The loneliness was a relentless tide, pulling me under, but in its depths, a faint whisper stirred, a question I couldn't ignore. Could I find myself again, beyond this ruin? I'd stopped fighting the despair, letting it wash over me like the Baltic wind rattling the pines. The blog lay abandoned, its words too frail to hold my pain. The hearth flickered weakly, its glow a mockery of the fire I'd chased with Edgars. I'd sit for hours, staring at the ceiling, tracing cracks that mirrored my own, and feel the weight of my choices settle deeper, a burden I'd forged with every step toward that forbidden flame. Juris's face haunted me, his wounded eyes a silent accusation, while Edgar's goodbye lingered, a bittersweet ache I couldn't shake. I'd destroyed them both, shattered my own heart, and the guilt was a chain I couldn't break. Yet, in that stillness, something shifted. One morning, as dawn pierced the frost-laced windows, I stepped outside, the air sharp and bracing against my skin. The snow crunched beneath my boots, the world vast and quiet, and I breathed, deeply, fully, for the first time in months. The pines stretched toward the sky, resilient despite the cold, and I felt a flicker, faint but real, a spark of strength I'd forgotten I possessed. I walked, the path winding through Latvia's hills, and let my thoughts unravel, raw and unfiltered. What did it mean to love? To be loved? I'd thought it was possession, a fire to claim, but now I saw it clearer. Love was balance, a fragile dance of giving and keeping, a harmony I'd shattered in my reckless hunger. The realization didn't heal me. It stung, a bitter truth cutting through the fog. I'd loved Juris, steady and flawed, and Edgars, fierce and fleeting, but I'd lost myself in both, chasing shadows instead of standing whole. The path ahead wasn't easy, I knew that. Forgiveness wouldn't come swift or simple. It was a journey, a climb through the rubble of my mistakes. But as the wind whipped my hair, the cold waking my senses, I understood. I had to walk it. Alone, yes, but not defeated. I had to learn who Laila was beyond the wreckage, to find a balance I'd never sought, to love myself before I could love another without breaking them, or me. Days turned to weeks, and I began again, tentative but determined. I wrote, not for the blog, but for me, pouring my soul onto pages stained with tears and hope. The house softened, its silence less a prison, more a canvas, and I filled it with small acts, tending the fire, planting herbs, reclaiming pieces of the woman I'd been. Juris and Edgars remained shadows in my memory, a past I couldn't erase, but I let them rest, wishing them peace from afar. Life stretched forward, uncertain and daunting, but mine, a fragile thread I'd weave anew, step by trembling step. This was my truth. Love wasn't a storm to conquer, but a quiet strength to nurture, and I'd find it within, no matter how long the road. Latvia's hills stood witness, enduring and vast, and I'd endure too, scarred, yes, but alive, searching for the dawn beyond the dark. Thank you for walking this journey with me through Laila's chaos and quiet redemption. What about you? Have you faced a moment where love tested your balance? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your stories, your struggles, your triumphs. Let's reflect together, grow together. Wishing you strength to face your own paths, peace to heal your wounds, and love that lifts without breaking. Until next time, take care, and may Latvia's winds carry you toward your own light.